We're surrounded by products. It's in the clothes that we wear, the books that we read and use, and phones and televisions. And all of these products are manufactured. And one of the things in business English is to be able to talk about manufacturing, manufacturing industry, and the manufacturing process. Now, one of the ways that you can talk about manufacturing is to talk about the past, the present, and the future of manufacturing. This is quite a simple structure. You can use it in presentations, in essay structures, and it's a structure that works very well. So what we're going to do in this video is look at this structure. We're going to look at the history of manufacturing, the past of manufacturing, what's happening in the present day, and what could happen in the future. So if we look at manufacturing, manufacturing comes from Latin, and it simply means to be made by hand, being made by hand. And when we look at manufacturing, products were made by hand. They were handmade. And if we go back in our communities and we go back to human beings and human beings living in caves even, then they still would have produced things by hand. They would have manufactured products like tools and weapons in order to be able to hunt and gather and to get the food that they needed in order to live. And then if we look at the development then of communities and small hamlets and villages, then if you grew up in a village, then there would be different kinds of manufacturers. There would be, for example, a blacksmith, and the blacksmith would make all kinds of metal tools and goods. There would be a potter who would make all the plates and the dishes and the cups that households needed, and somebody making bread, and somebody making dresses and clothes. And this was very labour intensive. These products, again, they tended to be made by craftspeople. There was a lot of craftsmanship involved. There were skills that were often, indeed, they were kept in families, and the father would hand down the skills, for example, of a blacksmith, and they would hand them down to their son, who would pass them down to their son, and so on. Manufacturing often happened around the home. That was often connected to the home, or done in the home, like dressmaking, or it was in a small workshop connected to the home. And then we come to a game changer, and the game changer was the Industrial Revolution, starting around the end of the 18th century, the late 1700s. And the Industrial Revolution was really about manufacture being done more and more by machines and being centred in larger places where people worked. So there was the development of smaller factories and larger factories, and people very often moved from living in small hamlets or villages or rural communities into large cities where these factories were located. Production became more efficient, and it was possible to mass produce large quantities of products, and we come to the concept of mass production. Now, another development that you can introduce into your business English discussions and answers is the idea of the assembly line. The assembly line, if you think about the assembly line, connect that with Henry Ford and the manufacture of cars. And Henry Ford introduced the assembly line into the manufacturing process in the United States in 1913. Now, if you look at the traditional method of manufacture in factories, making cars, what workers would do would be to move around a car and build a car in a static place and build the entire car. And what the assembly line then was, instead of the workers going to the car was brought along the manufacturing process, it was first of all a rope and then chains, and it was taken from station to station, and workers worked on one part of the car, and then that part of the manufacturing process was completed and the car moved along the assembly line. Again, this made the manufacturing process faster, more efficient. One of the byproducts of this was that workers began to find the work less fulfilling and maybe a little bit boring because you were just working on one part of the car every day. Henry Ford introduced the $5 workday, meaning that the salary that Henry Ford paid was probably about double what was normally paid, and lots of workers, because of this salary, they moved from different parts of the United States and different parts of the world to Detroit. So moving on in the 20th century, we can see that there was more and more automation of manufacturing processes, and we can also see the development of supply chains and global supply chains. So for example, the raw materials for a product might be mined in one country, in country A, and then they're sent to country B where a product is manufactured, and then that is sent out to countries D, E, F, G, and all around the world. Other concepts that you can bring into your discussions are probably just-in-time manufacture, which is JIT. This was introduced, or it's credited with being introduced by Toyota from around about 1948 through the 1950s and 1960s. And the idea of just-in-time, again, is workers working at the workplace in the factory, and that the goods or the materials that are needed to manufacture a product, that they're provided to the workplace when they're needed by the workers and by the manufacturing process. This means that there's probably less wastage, and companies don't have to hold, or they didn't have to hold, large inventories or stocks of materials that they needed for the manufacturing process or of the finished products. We can also look at the standardization of products. So the idea of making the same product that is sold, that is manufactured, and you can find it and it's the same all around the world. And then we move along to today and present day manufacturing. I would divide this into three different areas. So the first area that I would look at is the idea of smart factories and artificial intelligence. So smart factories are about machines being able to take over more and more and more of the manufacturing process, so that human beings are involved less and less. The machines are driven by data and controlled by computers. And this is when you get the advent of factories that are mostly machines, and there's maybe one or two people running the computers and running the factory. And then you get onto artificial intelligence, which is really a discussion today. And artificial intelligence is not only about the machines being used in the factory, but the machines being able to think for themselves, develop processes, and learn. The second thing that I would talk about is 3D printing or additive manufacturing. And 3D printing is about building a product by using material layer by layer. And there are two concepts here connected to 3D printing. And the first is customization. So when you have methods like 3D printing, then you can manufacture a product according to the needs and the wishes and wants of any individual customer, and products can be made individually according to those wants and needs and desires. With 3D printing as well, we can also begin looking at waste reduction, so the cutting down of material waste. And then we come to the third point, and this is to do with the world that we live in today, and this is to do with climate change. So talking about sustainability and green manufacturing. Now, sustainability is all about manufacturing products that don't harm the environment or have a very minimum effect on the environment. We can look at using renewable energies or renewable sources. So renewable energy is about using power sources that can be renewed. Things like the sun, using solar panels, for example, or using the wind to produce energy rather than using materials that are going to run out one day, things like coal. Then we can also look at what is called the circular economy. And the circular economy is about using materials that can be materials that are being reused or recycled. Now, if you think, for example, here about plastic waste in the ocean, well, you could take that plastic from the ocean and reuse it or recycle it and make different products. And Adidas actually do this. They make what are called their ocean plastic shoes, and these are sneakers made from recycled ocean waste. We can also have a look at Patagonia's circular economy model, which is all about reusing old clothes to produce new clothes. And then if you come on to talk about the future, well, what will manufacturing be like in 30 years' time, 50 years' time, 100 years' time? Will we have manufacturing in 200 years' time? And this is an area where you can let your knowledge come to play, and you can also begin to use your imagination. Again, you can certainly talk about artificial intelligence again, and the development of artificial intelligence and the abilities of artificial intelligence. Maybe they will be able to, or they will begin to predict much more and be able to predict what is going to fail and what is going to work in the manufacturing process, and be able to repair these things. And there will be less and less intervention of human beings in the process. Space manufacturing is already a topic, and the idea of producing products in zero gravity. Maybe one day we'll be doing all our manufacturing on another planet. Who knows? It is important that you can talk about manufacturing when it comes to business English. In many or most business English course books, you'll find some section or indeed a whole chapter about manufacturing. Manufacturing will be the basis of a question in discussions or exams or assessment. You could, for example, be asked to discuss manufacturing in your own country and what manufacturing goes on in your country, and what kind of products are manufactured in the country, what kind of processes there are, and what impact it has on the economy. You may be asked to compare one country's manufacturer to another country, for example, Bangladesh and the United States. When you get into the world of work, you will also maybe end up working in a manufacturing company. And if you work in areas like sales and marketing, then you'll need to be familiar with the manufacturing processes and the products that are being manufactured and how they're being manufactured. You maybe have to take clients and customers or even VIPs around the factory. Another consideration is also, of course, we've looked simply at a timeline going from the past to the future. And things are much more complicated in real life than that. If we take pottery, for example, pottery can also be, today, it can be mass produced, and factories can produce the same product time and time and time again when it comes to pottery. For example, a standard kind of vase that's sold through big furniture stores and supermarkets. But in the same town, you could have a small artisan pottery where they're making individual items to sell, and there's still a lot of craftsmanship and a lot of handmade production. So different kinds of manufacture could be happening in the very town that you're living in, or the country that you're studying in. So that was manufacturing. From blacksmiths to the Industrial Revolution, to Henry Ford, to Toyota and just in time, to smart manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and who knows what's in the future. If you like this video, please give it a like. Please think about subscribing to the channel and seeing all my other videos for business English study. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.